Thank you, Shane, and welcome to another slice of the good, the bad, and the orange. Today we have an esteemed member of our real estate community, a philanthropist, the wisdom of Solomon, and all-around good guy who loves cars, motorcycles, and now Armenian cucumbers. Louis McCall. Louis is past president of the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors and is very involved on a local, state, and national level in real estate issues. And also, we have my favorite son, my only son, and an expert marksman at shooting real estate targets, Taylor Jasper.
Backed by popular demand.
Backed by his own popular demand, yes. So today we're going to talk about a couple of issues, probably on different ends of the spectrum, but we're fortunate enough to have Louis come speak at our meeting today about what's happening in, Washington and Arizona and Scottsdale or the Phoenix metro area. And he did a wonderful presentation. Maybe we'll start with, let's maybe start at the 36,000 foot level and come on down. So thanks, Louis.
Thank you for having me.
So what, as we think about, issues that are coming down the pipe or things that might affect buyers and sellers, what have you seen that NAR has been working on, National Association of Realtors, to for the benefit, I guess, of buyers and sellers and agents as well, because we're the ones that guide the buyers and the sellers?
Well, when it comes to the National Association, I think they've done an outstanding job at mainly three things. Lawrence Yun, the chief economist, I think has done an excellent job at giving information that allows people to kind of chart their course going forward and what to expect from the Federal Reserve, from the economy in general. Another thing that I think they've done a really good job at is tracking migration. People really haven't paid very much attention until recently, kind of in the COVID and post-COVID world, of where people are moving and why, where they're coming from, why they're going there. And this is within migration within the United States. That has been something I think they've done very well. And then I would say the last thing would be, a big part of the National Association's job is to try to track and chart movement through the legislation, just so they can get ahead of things that will ultimately affect us from a legal perspective.
We didn't talk about this today, but you talked about tracking through the legislative process with Washington at, in my opinion, gridlock. Has there been much movement through Congress on housing issues?
There's been a lot of talk about it. I think there's been a lot of preparation for housing issues.
You're such a diplomat.
Yeah, I could tell you the number one way you will see, if you look on the White House website, or even if you look through some of the agenda items that are being proposed, a lot of it has to do with money being allotted to help develop more housing, build manufactured homes, build multifamily housing. They say that there will be a lot of work done to bring in nonprofit organizations and really just try to, get the ball rolling on tackling the housing crisis. I think the obvious bit that's being left out is the economy. The best way to solve the issue is a strong economy.
Taxes are low, it offers a lot of services, it's safe, and yet when you talk about affordable housing, that can clash with the strong demand. So if you have people that really want to come here, it makes it a commodity, everything's a commodity, that a lot of people want, which drives price up, which makes it difficult to achieve whatever they perceive affordable housing is. And that's unfortunate. We again, the legislature likes to talk big, but no one really is on the ground, and so we hope that NAR is one of those advocates for that.
Certainly, and I think you make your money on the purchase in real estate. So I think there's certain people who made the right purchase at the right time many years ago, and in the last 6 months have cashed out at an astronomical amount of money, where it's well worth the I'm going to live with family for 2 years play. You might end up entering the market back at not the lowest price, but at least you have the liquidity to do so and make some decisions on where you really want to be. But that's a dangerous game because in a perfect world, you had more than one house or you had a rental, and maybe you sold your rental and you've utilized that cash to pay off your current home, because you still have to be somewhere. So I've seen a lot of people who are taking that gamble, and you know, it's the old term, the market can remain volatile longer than you can remain solvent, right? So I've known people who have done this. They've bought the van, they've traveled around the world, and they're back. And they're back because they run out of money. They're back because $200,000 doesn't go as far as you think it does after, 24 plus months into COVID. And now they're back at square one. So I tell people, if you can cash out and you can sit on that money and you can really preserve it, it could be a great opportunity, or you might just end up entering the market back high. And but I think the key is when you do that, you might be on a 7-year cycle if you don't strike when the iron's hot.
7 years?
Yeah, I mean, you know, our cycles are about 11 and 13 years when we kind of have our recessions and our kind of our receding that happens like clockwork. So I just tell people, okay, if you sold at the height now, hopefully, you know, you're hoping it goes off the cliff before you start to run out of money. But if you really sit on it, you might be waiting it out for a little while. Or if you didn't sell your house, and you didn't take that cash opportunity, and now you have a hard time selling it because maybe it's less than what you expected, but still far more than what you ever thought you'd get, you might be waiting for this to happen again, and it might be quite a few years out before you see it as a value worth letting your property go.
Expectations.
Yeah.
You know, it's true. You know, you try to time. There's no timing the market. That is, you know, everyone says I'm going to time the market. I don't think anyone has ever timed the market. You look at guys like Warren Buffett, you know, he would buy things at value, but it wasn't necessarily, bankruptcies. It was where he saw value.
Certainly.
So where someone sees value, and we talked a little bit about that, how the younger generation, even before Taylor's generation, has been taught not to see value in owning a house. Well, you know, again, sometimes they look at the old people going, well, that's different because, you know, you bought when houses were $12,000. Well, there's a baseline for $12,000 today. Maybe it's $500,000, but in 20 years,
Yeah, 100%.
it's going to be.
I mean, you also walked uphill both ways when that was the price.
I did
right?
that. Yes.
You know, I hear that a lot, and I think you brought up a good point. Is the long
You
play?
didn't have snow in Atlanta though.
We did when I first moved there.
Oh,
We
did you?
stopped
All right.
getting snow about 10 years after that. It got a little warmer. I remember it just used to get a little more snow, but some
Does that
places
mean
get a lot of
you're
snow.
an advocate of massive climate change? Is that what you're saying?
It certainly changes.
Let's,
but
can we poach you on that?
No,
I'm
no,
kidding.
I just
Sorry.
feel like if
Sorry.
all dinosaurs needed was a lot of money to still be alive and survive the ice age, maybe we'd be onto something. But
Well,
apparently it's
that's-
deeper than
Well,
that.
I
you know?
mean, not to go down a massive rabbit hole, but I did look this up. Okay, so we had that water guy come, right, and he talked about how they can make it rain. Right?
Yes.
Well, if you Google search, the first thing pops up, it's myweather.com or whatever it is. And it actually says in there, private companies and the government can make weather.
Well, I read years ago, sidebar, I thought it was a thing. I don't know what was it, magnesium or silver particles in the clouds. And I remember that being, I thought, a Department of...
That's what it was.
I thought it was a Department of Defense
Yeah.
idea, because if you were in a trench, if you can make it rain on the opposition, of course you lose your morale. So it's doable, but there's a finite amount of fresh water, so we're screwed there. But
We can take it for, that's a whole nother podcast.
You know, did you see, he called it sidebar, we called it a rabbit hole. I think he's far more
Well, he's in a place
sophisticated.
Yeah, he's in a place of power.
Oh,
Position.
stop.
He's
No,
voters.
I got nothing.
Past
I got nothing
president,
past,
yes,
I got nothing going on.
Where were we? We were talking about timing, and
Yes.
yeah,
And I was going to say too, I think the crazy thing about the timing is you never know when it's right. But if you're in there for the long haul, it will ultimately work in your favor. A friend of mine is just fascinating because I did some 1031 exchanges for his mother coming out of Southern California. But this is a lady who I think graduated college, black lady, graduated college I think in the late 40s, was a teacher, husband was a postman. They bought a multitude of duplexes and quadplexes over the years in Los Angeles in the 70s, paid them off by the 90s. And it's just funny because now she's in her late 80s, but when you really think about the fact that rent tends to go up kind of at a steady pace because that's more population based, but the values, though they ebb and flow, they always flow at a higher price than they ebb. And I think the problem is how do we tell people if an investment cycle is 10 years, but everybody moves on an average of every 7 years? They'll never realize the gains. And I think we're doing we're putting people at a disadvantage, particularly young people, because instant gratification is a big issue, not waiting for the long term, and also not seeing the value or not having a clear roadmap on how they plan to get to retirement, and it's not always through a job.
Well, truest thing ever said. I think that's our job. You talked about that a little bit today. It's like getting into the schools again and just talking about what is the real value of home ownership. And I know we kind of got off the national, local, and regional issues, but it's true, and it's a place we have to start. I think generation cycle, as we can see, we go from very prim and proper to the crazies to back to something in between, and then back to something else. But it always cycles, and hopefully in this next cycle or generation, home ownership will become important again.
Yeah.
But it starts with us instead of.
100%. Yeah, I think it does. I think if you're going to be in the business, I think on any level, your job, your secondary job, aside from prospecting from your own business, is really making sure that you're putting the right information out there that would just encourage someone to get involved in the business of real estate at some level, not necessarily get a license. But
we don't have enough, though.
Yeah,
we don't have enough
whether they're a
licenses.
buyer or a seller. I mean, to that point, I've met people just in the last year who make very high incomes who think they should quit their high incomes to sell real estate. And I'm like, no, you should keep your high income and you should buy up everything. I mean, if you're making $400,000 or $500,000 a year and you live on 70, you should really be buying things up for the, so I think it's on us to really encourage that. And I think the one issue that we're running into, particularly with young people, is, like I said, in civics, it's very difficult. If we're not encouraging people to understand the benefits of the country, the value of the country, what the country has done for people and what it can continue to do, if that's becoming theoretically an extremist mindset, we can't expect children to want to make that long-term investment.
Well, I mean, that actually makes sense, right? Because the World Health Organization, right, their motto is you will own nothing and you will like it. They want renters. That's the future.
That's I watched somebody, it was about clothing, and I think this was like before Zara got really big, but I remember many years ago when this idea of kind of like the throwaway clothing market, or now rental clothing. And it's very interesting because I sometimes I'm talking to younger people and they're like, no, I'm going to lease a Tesla and I lease my phone and I borrow my clothes, and I'm thinking, someone will own everything. Mm-hmm. You just won't have anything. But somebody, remember, those clothes will belong to someone. Those cars, that property will belong to someone. And the fact that we're having the rent subdivisions, the subdivisions that are being built solely for the purposes of rentals, the fact that that's even super popular, to me,
it's a scary proposition.
It's scary because what you're really looking at is not necessarily just, well, I need to live somewhere. You're looking at people who want a certain quality of life that for many people haven't quite earned quite yet. But they're wanting it, and they're seeing the easiest way to get those countertops, or the easiest way to get that is if I just do that. And I think that's a bigger problem.
And the short term, that makes them feel good. In the long term, they have no mechanism to build wealth except a job.
100%.
And that's the education. You talk about civics, and civics also teaches people about the Second Amendment.
Correct.
And both of you.
That was a nice segue.
Well, I was looking for one. Are very well trained, safe firearms owners. But so, what's your favorite one of your firearms to shoot?
Be a rifle, Scar 17 308.
Ooh,
That's
do you
probably
have one of
I do.
those?
Yeah. That would be.
We're not worthy. We're not
Oh,
worthy.
stop, no.
No, but well, and we talk about Arizona. Arizona is a I keep calling it the Looney Tunes Wild West, kind of in a way. But it's a leave me. I'll leave you alone, or you leave me alone. But one of the things that it always struck me, Taylor, when he was doing his was doing some self-defense training, and he did it in Minneapolis. And he would ask people how many people own a gun, and they'd see this kind of people cowering to raise their hand, even though they all had them. And here, they'd all go, "Hey, I want to show you after the class. I got it right here. What are you going to tell me about it?" And I think that's actually one of the attractions to me of Arizona is, you know what, you can, if that's your passion, go ahead and do it. No one's going to get in your way. And but how did you get segued into firearms?
Oddly enough, it's kind of interesting because it's really it's kind of a sad scenario, but it actually didn't come full circle for many years. So when I was 15, my father was killed in a home invasion, and my mother at the time just got really serious about, like, you need to go, we need to learn self-defense, whatever the case may be. And we went to this store, and it was a place called, I think it was called Master Gunman. But it was in Stone Mountain. I remember this, that was the name of it. It was in Stone Mountain, and I get in there, and we were kind of new to Georgia at the time. And it was a very, whatever you would imagine, kind of a backwoods gun store to be. And I remember going in there, and the guy who ran the store kind of looked like one of the guys from ZZ Top, all right? And I shot the first time, and he was like, "Wow, you're really good." And he started just giving me random things to try. He's like, you guys got to buy the ammunition, but you don't have to pay to rent any firearm here, right? So he kind of got me in the habit of shooting, but that was when I was like 15 and 16 years old. I owned a firearm for many years, just one, nothing crazy. And then what I realized when I came to Arizona, to your point, was I thought I was pretty well trained. And then I realized, okay, well, can I clear a malfunction under stress? Probably not. Do I carry a spare magazine? I certainly did not. So I'm glad I never had to use my firearm. I would have been screwed. And then when I got here, I went out with a client and I realized, oh wow, I'm like low man on the totem pole. And to your point, the lifestyle and the openness here, I think, really got me into the education of it. Because what you realize the whole time I grew up in Atlanta, it's a high ownership rate, but I didn't know anyone who actually ever went to a training course beyond just working a firearm. Whereas when I got here, not only did people go to training courses, but they were doing defensive courses, offensive courses, fighting rifle courses, at a level that the safety was just significantly taken more serious.
Well, it's interesting. Scottsdale actually has one of the best schools in the nation. That's Haley Strategic.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, they are phenomenal. I actually almost got to go to a course, but it just didn't quite work out.
Yeah.
Could they be a sponsor of the group band?
Well, you would probably have them on.
That'd be
You
awesome.
should try that.
Well,
Well, go
he's a
ahead.
Marine too.
Yeah. No, Haley does some great stuff, some
He
cool
does.
products.
He's got
Yeah.
great products.
Yep.
But yeah, the seriousness, it's interesting because, right, law enforcement, actually, they usually train only to about 7 yards, by the way, which is very, very interesting when it comes to marksmanship. And they have a massive union. I support the police. I'm not passionate.
They have a police association.
They have, police association that come and cover their butts when they shoot, when they have to use their firearm, and their accuracy is pretty low. Whereas as a civilian, we don't actually have any of that kind of protection. I mean, I have USCCA insurance, and so does my wife if something happens. But really, and that is actually part of the Second Amendment. I mean, it's part of a responsible government is to train.
Correct.
So,
Well, don't you think, I was just going to say, in areas where there's an open acceptance for Second Amendment or firearms, there's a correlation between training. You just laid it out.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to areas where it's kind of a little taboo to be a gun owner,
Mm-hmm.
and so the training is lower key or it's not as well accepted. They think those are the crazies. here where it's widely accepted and you've got schools all over and they're training on all sorts of different levels. I mean, that.
Well, you bring up a very good point, because where it's a little more taboo, it's hard to be open about it, meaning it's actually a little more difficult to be safe about it. And so it's in a place like this, you'll realize that a lot of people will see you doing something maybe not proper, and they will be trained enough to instruct you and encourage you to do the same. But the training goes back to, I think you brought up a very good point about insurance and liability. If you're much like in any business, the more trained you are, it's there to kind of reduce liability. I used to bring up a good point about what you just mentioned. My sister's an officer. She just retired from Tempe Police after a critical incident a couple of years ago. But we've talked about it in great lengths. It's qualification of not all officers are shooters. Not all officers are marksmen. So some of them will qualify annually. Right.
I mean, that's
a good point.
It's funny, people enlist, and they're like, oh, you're in the military, you're a gun expert. There are many people who served in the military, no disrespect, that maybe, unless they're in the Marine Corps, they qualify every year. But other branches, you maybe shot at boot camp 20 rounds or whatever it is, and you never touched a rifle since then.
One thing that's very interesting about that is I realize as I've gone out with more and more clients over the years, especially people who come from out of the country, they're really fascinated by our ability to own firearms, and they love to go shooting. You realize that a lot of people who have been in the service, especially in the last 20, 30 years, they're not issued a sidearm. So if they were issued a weapon, they were only issued a rifle. And a rifle, because of multiple points of contact, is easier for more people to shoot. Handgun skills are not very good for most people, which is even that are coming out of the service. And so I think it's one of those things where if it's something you're going to do because of the liability involved in it, there's states where there's open carry, there's concealed carry. I always advocate, if you're going to open carry, I think the Kydex holsters are ridiculous with no retention, because anybody could snatch it, right? And one other issue we have is a lot of people don't have good empty-handed skills, so they resort to firearms because they can't fight. They can't fight. They don't really actually know what they can't protect themselves in general. And I think that will also bleed into personal excessive force, right? And they don't mitigate a circumstance the way they should because they're not confident in their own ability even to protect themselves under the most basic circumstances.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Arizona does have stand your ground stand your ground.
Stand your ground. It's just not
it's
Castle
not
Dog Street or
right.
Florida.
It's not necessarily that, but it does say that you do have, if you're in an area and someone does approach you, you do have the right to use force. There are caveats to it, obviously. I'm not going to get into all of that.
You still have to fight your case, remember?
But you still have to fight your case, but also that doesn't just give you the green light to quicker
Certainly.
on someone,
Certainly.
and be the Arizona Ranger who shoots, what's the guy's name? Texas Rick.
Okay,
Anyways, it doesn't just give
I'm
you
in the dark here, as you can see.
As am I.
No, that's good.
But what it does is you do need to de-escalate. I mean, that
Certainly.
is something they're going to ask you. They're going to ask you. Hand-to-hand skills are very important. Most self-defense cases happen within 5 or 6 feet. Ground fighting,
Very close.
all that kind of stuff. So, and the other thing too with handguns, right? Everyone always wants a little gun. One, the smaller the gun is, the harder it is to shoot, and actually the scarier it is to shoot. Your hand is a lot closer to that barrel.
Certainly.
And go ahead.
Well, that's a good point, because people always ask, well, what should I get? I said, the best thing you can do, go out to a store. The people at the stores, especially in this town, are super helpful.
Yeah.
Hold as many as you can, get comfortable. You don't actually want less ammunition, so you don't want to go too small. But comfort and your ability to control a firearm, I think, is extremely important. You brought up an interesting thing just about even qualification. You'll realize when you go to a lot of places and you see professionals qualifying, they're not qualifying under stress. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be on a treadmill for 5 minutes before they shoot. They don't have to plank. They don't have to do any of that. Whereas if you go to a very good private training course, you will probably only shoot under stress. Heart rate is up, adrenaline is pumping. You'll realize, God forbid your hands are wet, hopefully just from water and not anything more serious, it is significantly harder to control a small firearm when you're given the reality of the circumstances.
Well, absolutely, and we always fall back to the training that we know. So if you go to the range and you shoot 10 rounds from a static position at a round target at 7 yards, that is the best you will do under
That's
stress.
what you do.
Everyone always thinks they're going to rise to the occasion and be this like crazy John Wick guy.
Nah.
And it's like, no,
It's
you're
not
not.
going to happen.
It's not
You're going to
gonna-
revert to what you know. And I'll tell you some advice I was given very young. If you're very calm and you've got a very calm heart rate and you're standing perfectly still and the target is paper, but it's doing the same, it's standing perfectly still, not moving, and it's very calm, you're probably committing murder and you should probably not have a firearm, because under no circumstance would that ever be the reality of a situation. So if that's the way you're going to practice, you're really at a tactical disadvantage.
And there is obviously a reason for that. I mean, there is.
Mhm.
It's necessary to practice your actual marksmanship, but there's a
Certainly.
difference between combat marksmanship and regular marksmanship.
You know, I think that is a great point as it relates to hiring a real estate agent. You know,
Interesting.
there's
Full
90,000 licensees, and how many of them have written a contract? But if you're negotiating to buy the biggest asset of your life for most people, don't you want someone who's well-trained
Well-trained.
in all sorts of situations, who's dealt with inspection messes and title flaws and multiple offers? I think it's so much like marksmanship.
No, you're right. And it's funny because it comes down to training. I recently started riding a motorcycle, and I tell people a lot of the fundamentals carry over, right? How well trained you are, to his point, you're not going to rise to the occasion once those people
No.
are looking at you to correct this scenario. And if you make it a point to be well trained, or you make it a point to have a good support staff, and I think one problem that we're having is a lot of organizations have less and less and less support for the person out
Virtual
there.
or no
Yeah.
one there, I agree.
It's
And-
going to be difficult for you to navigate the most challenging times of your career, potentially of your life, and definitely of that person's purchase. The training, and I think this goes back to when I first, like I said, when I first got involved in firearms. I had one for years, but in hindsight, I'm so glad I never needed to use it. With most jobs and in most businesses, I think the problem is people are allowed to coast for a very long time, and they don't realize how lucky they have gotten. And then it takes that one. I was involved in a flood scenario a couple of years ago. It takes that one flood and that one good lawsuit before you
Yeah.
realize that maybe I should have
Well,
gone the extra step. from a
And we've
training
gone
perspective.
through 2.5 years of vertical real estate, and a lot of agents don't even know what a normal market is.
Correct.
And now we're in one, and that takes a lot of skill and ability to navigate. And I didn't mean to cut short the conversation on firearms, because I think we could do a whole episode on that, and we probably will. Just a note on the market, it is not crashing. I'm just looking at the stats, and it says we're not crashing. I think the thing we'll watch is interest rates, because that's the only variable right now that could push the market a little bit, and make it a little softer. Talking to our mortgage experts today, which I am not, there's a strong belief that probably by first quarter of this year, we'll see rates dropping back, as any sign of inflation coming down will favorably impact the 10-year treasury, or the mortgage rate, the market for mortgage rates. And there's some predictions of between 4 and 5%. So buy now, get with a lender who will refi with no costs, refi in 6 months, buy a house. It's your best asset. Any last, I had said Lewisisms, because you do have them. Do you have one last word of wisdom?
All I can do is advocate what you just said. You take advantage of your current situation, the job you have, whatever you have going on, and you allow your circumstances to speak to when you make the purchase. Because at the end of the day, once you pull the trigger on that decision, any of this fluctuation, whether it's inflation or whatever the case may be, that fixed mortgage is something that will save you when you get into inflationary times like this. That's going to be your only protection from inflation. And if you spend enough time looking at business or traveling around the world, you will realize that the 30-year fixed mortgage is almost completely unique to the United States.
is.
And not enough people take advantage of it.
Right. Taylor, a Taylorism, related to firearms, home safety, real estate. That Armenian cucumber next to you.
Yeah, it's on the camera. So actually, I read some words of wisdom on the internet from a page I follow on Facebook.
Was it my
Inspired Me.
page?
No,
Oh.
it was not. I'm not going to say the name of the page, but actually, so this guy's he's standing on there, and people always ask me, you know, should I run? What kind of optic should I run? What kind of light should I run? Should I run a suppressor with my gun? Whatever. And he said, how about running a mile? And the real point of that is anyone who has done any firearms training knows or has been in a fight, cardio is huge. So you don't necessarily have to have the best gear, you don't have to have the latest Glock Gen 5 or whatever. Get on the treadmill.
Agreed.
Stamina, right?
Yep.
It's real estate, stamina, stay the course. Lewis, it's been a pleasure. Taylor, always a pleasure. You have a voice and a face for radio where your old man has no face for radio. Join us next time. Watch us on YouTube. It'll be an interesting clip of this as we had a little battery malfunction, but it'll still be interesting. So follow us on YouTube and like and subscribe, and also on your favorite podcast outlet. We are on More Than I Know we're on, so that means lots of them. And tune in next time. Thank you.